أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, brothers. It's good to see you all again, alhamdulillah, after the Ramadan break. How was Ramadan? It's quick. It went quickly, isn't it? SubhanAllah. So it's been a while since we last had this circle. Just a reminder, what we plan to do is just every other week, inshallah, just choose a few ayat and reflect over them and just maybe draw a few lessons over them. Just short, maybe ideally like half an hour long, and then we can go home and have some time before Isha, inshallah. The ayat I was thinking about for today are from Surah An-Nazi'at. I was just talking to some brothers the other day about this surah and these ayat in particular. And we know Surah An-Nazi'at is a Makki surah. It was revealed before the Hijrah, and we know that the Makki surah are, have this characteristic style, and you can imagine the context in which the Prophet ﷺ is receiving this revelation. We often overlook this, but in the Quran, initially, it didn't come down like a book that we have today. It was the first audience of the Quran were listening to it, reciting out loud. The Quran was primarily a heard miracle. And this is reflected in the style and the tempo almost, and the rhythm even of some of the early surahs, because at that time the Prophet ﷺ was, reciting. That was one of his methods of da'wah, inviting the Quraysh, and at the same time he was competing against, the Quraysh would have people to just shout and kind of try and make noise and drown out the voice of the Prophet ﷺ. There would be storytellers, there would be soothsayers and fortune tellers are also in the area. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can see the powerful ayat that just capture someone's attention when listening to it. Right? And that's something we have to remind ourselves of, because it really allows you to enjoy reflecting over some of these ayat when you recognize, what was the atmosphere at the time of these, the earliest time of this revelation. And so you see these surahs, they have very powerful and concise messages, right? And one of the recurring motifs of Surah An-Nazi'at is that of At-Tughyan. Right? At-Tughyan means tajawuzul had, going beyond boundaries, transgressing, exceeding limits. And likewise, khashya. Khashya is a recurring theme in the surah, a recurring word, right? A repeated word in the surah. Khashya meaning fear out of awe and love, right? A fear born out of awe and love. And when we look at it this way, we understand, or we appreciate that, in some surahs it might appear that there's maybe a tangent where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about one thing, then He brings our attention to something quite different. So you find in this surah, in the beginning, it's talking about the people who are, denying the day of resurrection. How إِذَا كُنَّا إِذَامًا تُرَابًا, when we become, scattered bones and dust, how are we going to be resurrected again? That doesn't make sense to us. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about those people that it's going to be just like that, and you'll be resurrected again. and hearts on that day will be in terror and so forth, talking about the day of resurrection. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about هَلْ أَتَاكَ حَدِيثُ مُوسَى. Has the story of Musa alayhi salam come to you? So it might seem that this is quite a tangent, you know? But when you look at the recurring themes, and this is one of the invitations to reflect and ponder over these surahs, why is Allah mentioning the story of Musa alayhi salam here, for example? Right? And we see that, you know, he says, اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى. Go to Pharaoh, for indeed he has طغى. He transgressed the bounds. So we see that this is kind of the one of the lessons of this story and how it fits into the rest of this surah here. Right? Musa alayhi salam then tells him, so Allah says to Musa alayhi salam, فَقُلْ هَلْ لَكَ إِلَىٰ أَن تَزَكَّى. Would you, almost in a very polite way, would you like for me to kind of facilitate a path for you to become spiritually purified or spiritually transformed? وَأَهْدِيَكَ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ فَتَخْشَى خَشْيَى. Yeah? And that I, point you towards your Lord, or guide you to your Lord, so that you may have this fear born out of love and awe. Right? And then we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about very concisely the story of Musa and Fir'aun. Fir'aun, he turned away and he gathered people and he said, I am the Lord Most High. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punished him and he made an example out of him. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes back to the conversation of the Quraysh who are denying the day of resurrection, denying Allah's ability to resurrect them. أَأَنْتُمْ أَشَدُّ خَلْقًا أَمِ السَّمَاءُ. Yeah. So back to this topic now. Are you harder to create, or the heavens, the universe above you that you can see? Do you think you're so difficult to recreate, O human being? Right. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes بَنَاهَا رَفَعَ سَمْكَهَا فَسَوَّاهَا. He created the heavens, He constructed it, He raised up its canopy and made it all equal and balanced and everything. Right? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us some of His favors that He's done for human beings. He made the night and the day, and He made the earth suitable for human habitation. He extracted streams that we can drink from and pastures that we can give our animals, graze our animals on. Why is this all? مَتَاعًا لَكُمْ وَلِأَنْعَامِكُمْ. As an enjoyment for you and your animals, for you and your livestock. Mata' also carries the connotation of being temporary. So it's a temporary enjoyment. Right? And with that you think, okay, if it's temporary, you get that imagery of a temporary thing, then you think, okay, what's after that? What happens when it fades away? Then فَإِذَا جَاءَتِ الطَّامَّةُ الْكُبْرَى. And when the overwhelming calamity arrives, right? Talking about either the first or the second blowing of the trumpet, the destruction of the world or the resurrection of all human beings, right? And even the language, the imagery of tamma, from tamma yatimmu, to be overwhelmed or overspill, similar to what? At-tughyan, over, that imagery of transgressing or overfilling. If you overfill a cup, it overspills. It's taghal ma. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks on that day, on the day of resurrection, every person will know about, he will realize what he spent his life doing, literally what he ran towards. And the hellfire will be put on display for everyone to see. The paradise will be brought close. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the ayat that I wanted us to maybe briefly reflect on. Right. So after this kind of the half of the surah, or maybe more than half, we've seen what themes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, directed our attention to, the kind of imagery that He's given us with khashiyah, a kind of the role of guidance, fear out of love and awe, the harms of at-tughyan, of overstepping boundaries, transgressing or exceeding limits. And now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, with regards to reminding us of the day of resurrection, فَأَمَّا مَنْ طَغَى, and as for the one who transgressed, went beyond limits, وَآثَرَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا, and gave precedence to the worldly life, فَإِنَّ الْجَحِيمَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى, so then for him, the Jahim, the hellfire, one of the names of the hellfire, is his refuge, is his home. وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ, and as for the one who fears the standing of his Lord, وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى, and prevents the nafs from its desires, فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. So for him, paradise is his refuge, his resting place, his home, his abode. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving this contrast here to us. Right? On the one hand, the one who طغى وآثر الحياة الدنيا, he exceeds limits and he gives precedence, he gives preference to this worldly life. On one hand, on one side of the spectrum. The opposite, out of all of the things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have mentioned, right? He didn't mention the logical opposites of these, as one would expect. If you're trying to give a contrast, you would give the logical opposite of something, unless there's a reason you're calling people to reflect on something. So instead of saying, as for the one who doesn't transgress, as for the one who doesn't give precedence to the worldly life, no, he didn't say that. He said, as for the one who خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ, number one. Number two, وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى. Okay, and I thought this would be a good comparison, a good contrast to reflect on. Right? Now, they said, in the Mufassirin said, in terms of mentioning these people in particular, what they referred to, what Allah is referring to as at-tughyan here, as exceeding here, is in particular they mention exceeding or transgressing the boundaries in like kufr and sins. Yeah, because that is what earns somebody eternal damnation. Right? However, tughyan, they said, it can be applied on different scales. As you can imagine, transgressing a boundary can happen in any boundary. Anywhere there's a boundary, it can be transgressed. The boundary between iman and kufr, that can be transgressed, and that's obviously a major issue. But also the boundary between something that's lesser than that. The boundary between what is suitable or appropriate at a given time or place. So that's on one side. And subhanAllah, they also said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alluding to some kind of causal link between these two things. Between tughyan, between transgressing or exceeding a limit on one hand, and ithar hayati dunya, giving precedence to the worldly life, being more attached to the worldly life. Right? And this is one of the treasures of the Quran. When you read the Quran, Allah is giving you almost like natural laws. Yeah? Just like you might see a natural law in the creation that water boils at 100 degrees. for example. Likewise, you get natural laws in the Quran that require a bit of reflection to extract. Yeah, like for example, كلا إن الإنسان ليطغى أن رآه استغنى. Yeah, Allah says in Surah Al-Alaq, the human being will transgress if he regards himself as self-sufficient. If he regards himself as independent and self-sufficient, I don't need anyone, then he will begin to transgress. This is like a natural law. Just like fire burns wood, water boils at 100 degrees, feeling self-sufficient can lead to exceeding limits and transgression. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is giving another type of relationship here. That transgressing limits is linked to, in some way or another, either a cause or effect or both in different circumstances, is linked to ithar hayatud dunya, giving preference to the life of this world. Right? Now, everything has limits. Okay? And you can see that whenever you indulge in something too much, whenever you exceed the limits for that thing, there is a danger that you'll become too attached to it. This is some of the scholars, they describe these types of things. Like, for example, food. Like any desire of a human being. Right? If you give in to these desires and you transgress the boundaries, maybe you go beyond a particular boundary, you begin to be attached to that thing now. I remember when we went to Hajj, they upgraded us to business class in the flight. And it's the first time I've been in business class, and I was like, wow, look at this. And the seats lying down, and I've got so much room, and oh, is this the menu? I'll have this. No, that's just the first course. There's 3 courses. Wow, yeah, I'll bring them all. Yeah. And so when I went in, it was like, wow, this is amazing. But then after like a 6-7 hour flight, I walked through the economy class, and I swear to you, I felt my heart beating. I was palpitating. I was like, how are all of these people living so squashed up together? Are you okay, brother? I feel so I was hyperventilating because I had become used to that. I didn't even pay for it. It was free upgrade. I had become used. That had become my norm. Right? You just become attached to it now. And when you see this normal thing that you would have been happy with had you not seen that, you begin to feel, wow, this is terrible. How can anyone survive here? Right? And a brother who I know who flies a lot of business class because of his work, I realize he used to advise us. He used to say, don't go business class ever. Because you'll just get used to it. That will become your normal. You won't even feel the comfort anymore. You'll just feel, that's the bare minimum. He said, I try and fly economy where I can. So it's not haram. It's not a boundary between like halal and haram. But the point is, going beyond a particular boundary, even within the realm of halal, there is an attachment that comes with it. Right? And obviously, the more and more you get, the more boundaries that you transgress, the more you will give preference to these things, these temporary mata', these temporary enjoyments. Right? Hence, we see some of the wisdoms and the examples of why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using Fir'aun as an example. A person who went through so many boundaries and he began to oppress, he began to attribute himself with divinity and saying, I'm the ilah, مَا عَلِمْتُ لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرِي. He said, أَنَا رَبُّكُمُ الْأَعْلَى. He said all of these crazy things that if a normal person in the street would say, you'd say this person is Majnoon. However, he transgresses so many boundaries, and he was like the archetype, the kind of example of the quintessential Taghiya, the person who is a transgressor. Right? Now, on the other side of the scale, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, so that person, he's going to be in hellfire, the first one who transgresses and is so attached and gives preference to this worldly life. فَإِنَّ الْجَحِيمَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. Yeah. As for the juxtaposition now, the opposite, وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. Yeah. As for the one who fears the standing of his Lord, right? They said this means two things. The maqam, standing, could mean he literally fears standing in front of his Lord. He fears the day of resurrection, that he's going to have to account for all of his deeds. Yeah. And they also said another interpretation is that he fears Allah's status over him. Yeah. So the maqam is related to Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, the word Allah, the word Rabbi. Yeah. He fears the status of his Lord over him. Yeah. And as in his Lord isn't, unaware of what he's doing, he's watching him, he's holding him to account, he's so high, so pure, that he doesn't deserve to be disobeyed. So this person, right, as for that person, right, so we have this notion of fear now highlighted. Fear is important, right? Fear of his Lord, someone who he loves. وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى. And he prevents his nafs from the hawa, the desires. Right? فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. As for him, then paradise is his resting place. Now question, are desires bad? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is praising the person who prevented his desires. Is this thing on? Limits? So if they go with what Allah is pleased with, then they're good. If they go against what Allah is pleased with, then they're bad. That's a very diplomatic answer, mashallah. Political answer. So what are desires? They said desire, you can say, is a natural inclination towards what you incline towards. It's a bit of a circular thing. Yeah, a natural inclination towards what agrees with you. Yeah. And the desires, they said desires, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put them in us. And if you look at all general desires, right, they are there and they are needed for the to sustain life, to sustain our existence on this planet, in this dunya. Right? What are the main desires that we have? Food, drink, and reproduction. Okay. The main desires, and you have lesser ones as well. But generally speaking, they said desires in general, in an unrestricted sense, should not be kind of condemned. What they say على الإطلاق, in a completely unrestricted sense, right? But why then is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praising the one who prevents or restricts his desires? Is this a contradiction? No. Ah. Boundaries. What was the meaning of tughyan? Transgressing, exceeding boundaries, limits. Right? So it is a kind of opposite. But not clearly. We have to reflect on it a bit to extract why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning these two. On one hand, someone who transgresses boundaries and becomes so attached to this life. On the other hand, who is Allah praising? The one who restricts himself, his nafs, from its desires. Not ala al-itlaq, not completely, absolutely preventing your nafs from all of its desires, because then you would die, literally. Right? Eventually, if you prevent yourself from satiating your hunger, from quenching your thirst, right? At least these two, then you can't survive. But boundaries, limits. And this is where Islam it fits in the middle of all other kind of philosophies, all other ways of life and religions and so forth. When it comes to looking at human desires, looking at human nature, in many spectra, many kind of scales, you'll find Islam, and particularly the Sunnah, is in the middle of those of different extremes. Right? SubhanAllah. It's not the way we want to do it, it's the other way that Allah asks us to reflect on our true nature, which is our angelic nature, our spiritual nature. And the more we incline towards that, the more we incline towards generosity. SubhanAllah, excellent. There's an animal angel continuum. Yeah? We have an animalistic side, that those desires which we share with all animals as well. Hunger, thirst, sexual reproduction, all of these things. And then there are those things which are beyond the natural realm, beyond the biological. Right? And each human being has these often competing things inside them. And it's interesting, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned وَنَهَى النَّفْسِ. He prevented his nafs from its desires. Right? You know, a lot of our physical desires, they can be linked to this worldly body of ours. Right? Hunger, thirst, you can feel hunger somewhere. And one of the places that these desires are linked to is the limbic system in the hindbrain. Right? This is the most primitive part of the brain. It gives you, the most primitive signals, like an animal or like a caveman. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty. Yeah, give me this, give me that. The bit that lights up maybe when you see maybe a person of the opposite sex as well, right? Or when you're, these types of impulses. And they say that this is where many desires are stimulated from, okay, in terms of the brain. But it's the prefrontal cortex here that actually controls which signals are acted upon, or blocks some signals, right? And the earliest definition of aql, which we now know to be intelligence and thinking and stuff like that, the earliest definition of aql was what? Was mana', was prevention, was restraint. This is what the Quran and the language, the era in which of the Fatatul Ihtijaj, the era in which the Quran was revealed and the Prophet ﷺ lived. This is what aql and the verbs derived from it was used as primarily. So aql in the language of the Quran is not someone who's necessarily really good at maths. True aql is someone, not just someone who recognizes, something in a cognitive way, but is someone who recognizes it and is able to act upon it. Someone who recognizes the truth and is able to resist his temptations, resist the social stigma, the unpopularity, and bear the hardship that comes with following the truth. That is an aqil person. The aql is not censured anywhere in the Quran or in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Many people have this misconception, right? Because of the censure of some types of ra'i, of opinion. That's something else. Aql itself as a faculty is a positive. In fact, Allah censures those who don't use their aql. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ مَا لَكُمْ كَيْفَ تَحْكُمُونَ. So much censure of the disbeliever who doesn't use his. I like to point here, aql, when his mind or his heart, his qalb. This is the thing that does the thinking, the reflecting, the pondering. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning here, the one who he is praising is the one who prevents the nafs from its desires. And this is what I want to talk about as well, and that is the link between fear, khashya, tughyan, going beyond boundaries, sins, desires, and intelligence. All of these things are linked. Sins have an impact on your intelligence. Desires have an impact on your thinking. Right? When you're angry, you can't make a rational decision. Right? When you have an interest, a conflict of interest, you're not an impartial judge in a matter, are you? Right? And this is what the rejection of Islam or the rejection of the Sunnah is based on. It's not based on an actual cogent use of aql. It's based on desires, it's based on being attached to something, it's based on sins. Sins bruise our ability to think clearly. Right? And how is fear affected by this? How is fear linked? Khashya or khawf? A person who actually is able to benefit from revelation, benefit from any admonition, or learn genuinely, he has to have an element of khashya. Yeah, it's no surprise therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end of the surah, when he says يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ السَّاعَةِ أَيَّانَ مُرْسَاهَا, they ask you about the hour when it's going to be established. فِيمَ أَنْتَ مِنْ ذِكْرَاهَا. Is this a rational question they're bringing? No, it's to make fun from istihza. Yeah. How are you going to know? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, what? You don't know when the hour is. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, إِلَى رَبِّكَ مُنْتَهَاهَا. The extent of it is with your Lord. إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ مُنْذِرُ مَنْ يَخْشَاهَا. You are only a warner to those who fear it. Yeah. So there is an element of fear, an element of humility, of humbling yourself, that is required to learn truth, right? To go beyond your desires, resist your desires, and actually learn truth and follow it. Benefit from revelation. Fir'aun, and why did Allah mention the story of Musa and Fir'aun? Yeah, He said, فَقُلْ هَلَّكَ إِلَىٰ أَن تَزَكَّى وَأَهْدِيَكَ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ فَتَخْشَى. Should I, guide you towards your Lord that you may be spiritually purified or transformed or grow spiritually, and that I guide you towards your Lord so that you may have khashya, this fear, humility, love, awe. They're all linked. Right? So I thought this would be a good, I thought I was just reflecting the other day, it's a good kind of contrast Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us. And yeah, is there any questions or comments? Jazakallah khair for that comment, very good. Inshallah. Yeah. Pardon? Yeah, that's what I heard. Yeah, iqal, like the thing that Arabs wear around their head. That used to be like when they want to park their camel, they just tie it around the. Yeah, iqal is literally a restraint. Yeah. And one of the common metaphors used in all wisdom traditions, right, for the human being, is the kind of the beast and the human being aspect. So the elephant and the rider, for example. I mention this a lot, like in Ramadan, for example, in fasting. The elephant, miskin, is being battered, right? No food, even things that he normally is halal for him. He's being, it's like fasting. Why is fasting, how is it connected to taqwa? How is it connected to strengthening yourself spiritually? One of the reasons is, it reinforces the superiority, the dominance of the higher thinking, your iman, the aql, over the base desires. Just that after Ramadan, you've just spent 29 days, 30 days, preventing the animal inside you from its most basic needs. So it's easy to stop it from, to stop it from doing haram things, to going towards haram inclinations. If we took part in this training, this process of Ramadan. So subhanAllah, you begin to then enjoy depriving yourself of its needs, some of its desires. Not to an extreme point, obviously, like some people might do. Don't know why I'm pointing at you. People might become overly hermetic, kind of ascetic, monkish lifestyles, going into the jungle or just eating leaves or whatever. That's a bit overboard, obviously, but just thinking, because so many people, they've never enjoyed this, the ability to say no to yourself. Just to maybe if a lady is walking past, you want to look at her, but you're enjoying almost your ability to control your gaze, right? And Allah puts this enjoyment in it. You're thirsty, maybe you're hungry, and you think to yourself, you know what? I'm the boss of this animal inside. I'll tell you when it's time to drink. I'll tell you when it's time to eat, right? But some people don't have this. And we live in a time where, in fact, the animal has been elevated to such a rank where that is what determines your whole identity now. Whatever your desire is, that's who you are. Whatever your desire is, you should feed it. Whatever you want to do, you should do it. Whatever you feel like, any whim, therefore, any fleeting thought, any kind of whisper of shaitan, it becomes who you are. You have to feed it. It's a disaster. We talk about boundaries. What is the logical conclusion of this? أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you seen the one who's taken his desires, his whims, as his ilah, as his God, his object, his deity, his object of worship and obedience? Yeah, this is a disaster for a human being, and we take it for granted. Like fasting. I remember in A levels, the head of sixth form or something, he came and he was like, I've never actually felt actual hunger. He's like, I admire what you guys are doing because I've never felt hunger. Hungry I eat. I'm thirsty I drink. Yeah. So some people they don't have this. They've never restricted themselves or restrained themselves, and in that is a type of enjoyment that you're doing something productive. You're strengthening your willpower.
Is there recurring, but it shows you have to have a certain kind of restraint to be able to receive revelation.
Maybe, yeah.
Must be substance in that.
Yeah, he said that in the months preceding the revelation, that seclusion became beloved to me. You know, that he used to go up for prolonged periods in the cave of Hira, just reflecting on, you know, the world issues around him. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yeah, I don't recommend it, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. However, it after the revelation came, the Prophet ﷺ stopped doing that. Yeah, so it's not technically from the Sunnah. Yeah. So the ulama said that it's not recommended to be secluded from people, but rather your seclusion that has been legislated is the night prayer, for example. This is your seclusion with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, instead of physically excluding a kind of yeah. But itikaf, yeah. So,
you do it in a place where you know everyone. It's certainly your chums are here. I would do it personally. I'd have to go to a place where no one needs me. Do you actually?
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know, that's just my personal thing. I don't know if you can do it just over there.
You can do itikaf like anytime. In some mosques they have curtains. They have curtains in some mosques that section off people's areas. And guys are too friendly here, man. But also, I mean, it's not like seclusion for short periods is bad anyway. I mean, some people are naturally, they're introverts, for example. They get kind of re-energize their batteries just being alone. That's not an issue. The issue is like, you know, on a daily basis. Prophet ﷺ said a believer who mixes with people and you know, is patient or perseveres, bears the annoyance and the difficulties with that, is better than a believer who secludes himself, you know, separates himself from people. So that's kind of your norm. Short periods is not an issue. Balance, yeah. The limits. Okay. Alright, I think we've got enough time to maybe go home before Isha. I'm going to go to my local, inshallah. I'm going to Slough, inshallah. Okay, جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.